Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight, voters have cast their ballots. We're live with the latest as primary polls are about to close.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now."
Shocking testimony on what President Trump did and did not do on January 6th.
Darren has my complete and total endorsement.
Ken Griffin's put $50 million behind his pick for the Republican gubernatorial race, but he seems to be falling behind. A look at how money is impacting elections.
These are vaccines that have been designed for the youngest children. They're safe for the youngest children.
And while kids under 5 are now getting vaxxed, we hear why the county is back at high COVID risk.
You should be glad, proud, and be who you are.
How an organization has been empowering young adults with autism for the last 10 years.
What everyone, even urbanites, need to know about those creepy crawly critters known as ticks.
And you may have seen the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District on your ballot, but what does that agency do? Jeffrey Bayer has the answer in tonight's Ask Jeffrey. But first, some of today's top stories. 37 of Chicago's 49 neighborhood pools will officially open on July 5th. That's with a switch to limited access to what the Park District calls underutilized beaches. Pools were supposed to open on Friday, but the Park District is facing an ongoing lifeguard shortage. With only 55% of lifeguard positions filled, 12 public swimming pools will remain closed across the city. In a statement, the Park District says, quote, "Neighborhood pools are incredibly valuable resources for our residents and families, providing recreation and relief from the summer heat. This plan allows us to maximize our limited workforce to open as many pools as possible so that families across the city have access to and can enjoy neighborhood pools this summer as well as the beaches." And you can find the full list of pools set to open on our website. Part of a McCormick Place structural wall crumbled onto DuSable Lakeshore Drive last night. Bricks from the Convention Center's Lakeside building came loose and fell onto 2 northbound lanes following the evening rush hour. According to the Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority, there was minor vehicle damage and no injuries reported. Crews have since removed the additional face brick around the damaged area. Cause remains unknown at this point. The city of Chicago rejected $500 million in asphalt bids for city work due to pollution concerns. That's according to a report from the Chicago Sun-Times. McKinley Park asphalt maker Matt and several rivals were asked to show plans to control pollution after community organizers expressed anger over pollution and odor over the past 4 years. The city's transportation department will issue a new solicitation for bids in October following new public health recommendations. And up next, we check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who is reporting live from right outside the City Board of Elections. So please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Polls are closing in today's primary election. Amanda Vinicky joins us now from outside 69 West Washington, where work is being done to put together today's election totals. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, typically Illinois voters have to brave the elements in order to cast their primary ballots in mid-March. But due to late census data coming in, Illinois pushed back the primary by 15 weeks. Meaning that bad weather, well, on a day like today, no excuse for not casting a ballot. Veteran Agapito Pete Valencia says shame on those who haven't.
It's my duty as a citizen.
A lot of people, oh, go ahead.
We can't let things go, you know, without us. Listen, I'm a history reader. I go back to Hitler's. I don't want to get involved in it totally. I lost 2 brothers in the Second World War. I don't want to see the same thing happen here.
Now, Pete is 89. By the way, he credits a diet of a lot of tortillas and beans for keeping him so young. Data from the Chicago Elections Board does show that those 55 and older have voted by far the greatest numbers this primary cycle. As of 5 p.m., the latest numbers that we had from the city's elections board, registered voter turnout was at 16.8%. The spokesperson there, Max Bever, tells me he hopes it reaches about 20% by the time the day is done. That does, by the way, include all mail and early voting ballots. Bever says that things today have generally gone all right, but about 5% of the city's 1,043 polling places were not able to open bright and early this morning as they were supposed to, and that was due to a lack of staff. As a result, some of those polling places didn't have paper ballots.
We had a good amount of resignations over the last few days, but a good number this morning, right at 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., right when things were supposed to be opening, though, too. And that is the cause for a delay for some of the 6 a.m. openings at our precinct polling locations. Right now, that ballpark's about 56 that were not open at 6 a.m. That's not a great number, but our investigators are out in the field. We're filling in those gaps with coordinators and other staff members.
Those gaps in election judges and the delays had not been enough to keep city polling places open past 7 p.m. Now, Bever says that morning of polling place problems are not unusual, though he says it's generally not of this magnitude, nor do you have people calling it off so late in the election day. He says it is hard to pinpoint an exact reason for what caused it this time around.
Unfortunately, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot of personal issues that people are reporting in. It is a summer date, too, so there are comfortability factors. But really, I wish I had one reason or another, but this was just a hard hitting right before Election Day opened. We don't want to blame any election judges, of course, but this is something that we will prepare for the November 8th election and get a lot more standby moving in the future. So if you've got if you've got viewers that are interested, please be an election judge for the November 8th election. Help us out. Help defend democracy.
Being an election judge, Chicago, it pays $230. Now, this is a primary, which means that it is not voters' final say. Rather, you have to pick a partisan ballot, and that is when parties choose their nominees to run in November's general election, and that's from statewide to local races. We're going to give a couple of the highlights. Republicans are going to choose someone to try to take the governor's office from J.B. Pritzker. He is expected to easily win the Democratic nomination tonight. Now, Republicans have 6 men to choose from for that nomination for governor. It is a contest that has drawn attention from former President Donald Trump. That, as well as the Attorney General's race and a downstate primary between 2 current Republican members of Congress, that's Rodney Davis and Mary Miller, are really seen as a fight between the party's long-established, more moderate ring and those that are conservative and affiliated with Trump. Depending on who wins, some of those highlighted contests could really change the nature of the GOP in Illinois. Also, in the suburban 6th district, you have 2 Democratic incumbent members of Congress facing off. That is Congressman Sean Casten, U.S. Representative Marie Newman. Also, the 1st Congressional District. That is an open seat given that Bobby Rush has retired after 15 terms. Reverend Jesse Jackson's son Jonathan is among the big names in a crowded field. There's no clear frontrunner in that race with so many people in it. It's hard to do that, but cameras were on hand as both Jacksons today cast their ballots.
We are very excited for this privilege, this opportunity again to vote. And to go out and vote with my father again is certainly a family tradition, and thank God that we're here to do this one more time. This is a privilege my father has oftentimes told me that most people around the world don't have, and that's the right to have self-determination through a ballot box. So we take this to be something that's very valuable.
Now, this afternoon, speaking of the value of voting, I caught up with a first-year medical student who is studying to be an OBGYN. Now, I didn't ask for who she voted, but she said that she will only support candidates who support the right to have an abortion.
I would say the biggest motivating factor was the recent overturn of Roe v. Wade. I'm in my scrubs now. I'm going into healthcare. This is a topic that's very important to me, and I think it's easy to feel powerless in times like this. And conveniently enough, it's election day, and I figured this was a great way for me to just show my support and do what I can.
We'll be watching the results, filing stories on our website. You can watch for those to come in, including there's more than just the races that I spoke about just a bit ago, and that is races from the local level through the General Assembly up to Congress. You've got a very contested primary for the Cook County Assessor, for the Secretary of State, and also for yeah, a whole bunch of contested races. We don't have time to go through them all, but like I said, please continue to check our website. Now, by the way, members of the Chicago City Council and also the mayor, not going to see them. They're not up yet. That's not until 2023. There were a handful of polling places in suburban Cook County that will remain open until 8 p.m. And coming up in just a bit, we'll speak with the county clerk as for why that is. And one final reminder, if you're happening to watch this on the phone as you are standing in line, that is fine. Stay there. If you're at a crowded voting location, as long as you're in line by 7, you can still cast that ballot. Back to you in the studio.
Good to know, Amanda. Thank you. We'll see you in a bit. And now to Paris and a look at dramatic testimony at today's January 6th committee hearing. Paris.
Brandon's bombshell testimony today in the quickly scheduled January 6th committee hearing from a top aide to the former White House chief of staff. Cassidy Hutchinson, among other things, testified that former President Trump attempted to grab the steering wheel of his car from a Secret Service agent to try and join the mob assaulting the U.S. Capitol. That was one of many shocking revelations that could turn up the legal heat on Trump, former Chief Counsel Pat Cipollone, and Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. And joining us now are Joe Walsh, a former Republican congressman and host of the podcast White Flag with Joe Walsh, and Renato Mariotti, a legal analyst, former federal prosecutor and attorney at Thompson Coburn. Welcome both of you back to Chicago tonight. Good to see you. Let's play that bombshell revelation today about Trump allegedly trying to grab the steering wheel from his Secret Service agent. Take a look.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Renato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
Joe Walsh, I'm sure you had a visceral reaction to what you heard today, but what about the base of Republican voters that you interact with a lot? What do you think their reaction is likely to be to all these revelations?
I'll tell you what, Paris, it was quite the day, because that wasn't even the biggest bombshell. To me, the biggest bombshell was this. The former president knew his supporters were armed. He knew that his rally goers in Washington, D.C. that day were armed, and he told them and instructed them armed to go down to the Capitol. Paris, I think these hearings are dinging Trump. I think they're impacting him even among his supporters, because it's clear that Donald Trump incited and orchestrated a coup. You watch that hearing today, Donald Trump orchestrated a coup and tried to carry out a coup.
And you mentioned the fact that he's telling his organizers to take down the metal detectors detecting weapons at his rally, saying they're not going to shoot me, take him down, take him down. Renato Mariotti, as bombshell as these revelations are, do you see anything here that serves as evidence in a possible criminal case against the former president or people like Mark Meadows or Rudy Giuliani?
You know, Paris, we've heard so many bombshells from and about the former president that a lot of people, I think, assume we're going to turn into some legal liability and didn't. And what I think is interesting is today, one of the rare instances where there's been bombshell, explosive testimony that actually may have some legal significance that I think might move the ball here. So, for example, the statement that Mr. Walsh mentioned a moment ago, I think that, to me, is actually the statement I key in on as well. Because Trump did give a speech to those rally goers, and the Justice Department, I think, traditionally would be very concerned about charging that as an incitement to violence, because the First Amendment has broad protections for political speech, particularly by the sitting president of the United States. And the Supreme Court standard is that you actually have to be inciting imminent lawless action. And I think his argument up till now is, his speech was all over the place. There's some spots where he talks about it being lawful and so on. Here you have a statement by the former president, knowing that these folks were armed and that they were going to be headed to the Capitol. I mean, I think the implication of that statement is he knew they were going to hurt somebody, but they didn't want to hurt him, so he didn't care. And I think it's enough for at least the Justice Department to consider the charge.
Renata, you've got the revelation that the White House knew days in advance that there were warnings of violence and didn't act on those. Joe Walsh, there's also, again, we've heard about this revelation, but that he agreed with the supporters that wanted to hang Mike Pence. Let's take a listen to that testimony.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
Joe Walsh, I think we've seen quite enough evidence over the years to establish a clear pattern of sociopathic behavior from the former president. Do you think this weakens his standing in the party? Because you've made the point over and over again, it's still his party and he's the nominee if he wants it.
It's his party. I think, Paris, he's still the nominee if he wants it. I don't think these hearings are going to impact the 2022 midterms. But I'm telling you what, Paris, I hear from his supporters every single day. And these last few weeks, they've been angrier than they normally are. They've been more defensive about January 6th than they normally are. I think these bombshells and this information that we're hearing at the hearings, because I don't think they're watching the hearings, I think they're finding out about this information. And I do believe among Trump's base, it's beginning to hurt him.
And perhaps it's piercing the bubble of information. I mean, we all kind of tend to go into our information bubbles, or us in the media, we try not to be in a bubble. But Renato Mariotti, as you watch the progression of these hearings, feels like the panel and Liz Cheney there, the vice chairs, moved up the food chain slowly. So from the testimony today, do you think it puts a squeeze on Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, and Pat Cipollone, the former chief counsel, to come forward and say what they know, or else face a lot of legal problems?
It's interesting. I think Cipollone has got some reasons not to testify that I think he's going to hang his hat on. He's an attorney. He was the White House counsel. I think he's going to say, look, I was an attorney and I have to, keep the secrets of the office of the presidency. I suspect that he's going to try to remain silent. As for Mr. Meadows, he's pursued, I would say, a very carefully orchestrated strategy by his attorney not to avoid testifying. They filed the lawsuits. They did comply in part with the committee and provided some documents, text messages, which we've seen. I think, and the Justice Department came forward and said they do not intend to prosecute Meadows. So I think Meadows, for now, is probably going to stay silent. I think the question really is, is there other evidence that's going to connect the dots potentially that either is going to generate a prosecution by the Justice Department of Trump for obstruction of official proceeding, or will they keep going after these crooked attorneys, who I actually think the strongest evidence thus far has been against Eastman, Clark, Giuliani, and will the Justice Department try to charge and flip them? And it certainly appears the squeeze is in on them.
Paris, this needs to be said. How courageous was this young 26-year-old woman today? Mark Meadows, what a coward. Cipollone, what a coward. All these Republicans, Paris, knew Trump's lie was a bunch of BS. They all knew it. They knew what Trump was doing, yet none of them have spoken up. And
Joe,
none
why
of
do you
these
think that
Republicans
is? Why do you
today
think
speak up.
Clearly a lot of folks around Trump knew about his problematic behavior. You've got the testimony today about throwing stuff against the wall, throwing China against the wall. Why do you think they still refuse to come forward?
Because the party is still his. They're scared to death of his supporters. They want to keep their, they want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their offices. They want to keep their influence. It's cowardly.
Renato Mariotti, very quickly at the very end, Liz Cheney alluded to potential evidence of witness tampering here. What do you make of what she revealed?
Interesting, worth further investigation, but I think based on what we've seen thus far, where it was really unclear whether that's going to result in anything or even who made those threats.
But she certainly wanted to put it up there, saying that there was certainly some coercive, softly coercive ways that folks close to the president were employing to get at some of these witnesses before they testified. All right. Wow, what a day. And our thanks to Joe Walsh and Renato Mariotti for joining us. Thank you as always.
Thanks, Paris.
Thank you.
And now back to Brandis for a look at how money is impacting elections. Brandis.
Paris, this year's gubernatorial primary has been dubbed the Battle of the Billionaires, with Hyatt Hotel heir J.B. Pritzker's largely self-funded campaign facing off against the $50 million Citadel hedge fund billionaire Ken Griffin donated to Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin. Despite those millions, Irvin has had no cakewalk in the GOP primary, and if polls are to be believed, he could lose to conservative state Senator Darren Bailey, who received Donald Trump's endorsement on Saturday. Bailey himself has garnered millions in donations from businessman Dick Uihlein. Money and politics. Is this the best system for democracy? Joining us to discuss wealth, power, and campaign financing are Elisa Kaplan, Executive Director of Reform for Illinois, a nonpartisan organization working on the role of money in politics, and Jay Young, Executive Director of Common Cause Illinois, which champions campaign finance reform and other issues. Welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight. Now, a few months ago, we know that Ken Griffin began spending millions on Richard Irvin's campaign. The Aurora mayor at the time seemed like the front runner, but the polls now show that at the very least, he's not going to run away with this nomination. In fact, he might lose it. Elisa, starting with you, please. Any thoughts on what happened in this gubernatorial primary?
Well, it could be one of two things. He could either just be the wrong candidate for the time, and that no amount of money can fix that. We've seen that before. I'm thinking Bloomberg in the presidential race, for example. Sometimes there's a candidate that just no amount of money can help. Or there's the possibility that he didn't spend enough money and other people spent more money. And as we've seen, as you mentioned, Bailey has his own billionaire benefactor with Dick Uihlein. And not only that, but he's got J.B. Pritzker and some organizations that Governor Pritzker supports, like the Democratic Governors Association, spending millions running ads against Irvin. And so there's altogether millions of dollars on both sides of that primary. And the third runner-up, Jesse Sullivan in the polls, also has billionaire backing. So all three front runners right now are enjoying or suffering from lots of funds from big donors.
Lots of money into this race. Jay Young, same question to you. What are your thoughts on how the race has shaped up?
I think she nailed it. I think the dollars that are spent in this race sort of dwarf what we see around the country. You know, I thought last time Governor Pritzker ran for this office, we set a national record. I expected that we'll do that today, you know, or I expected we'd do it in this race. It's difficult to say what will happen now. Again, as you said, if polls are to be believed, maybe it won't be the expected slate, at least maybe what Mr. Griffin thought. But I think there is a question about really where is the pull in the GOP? Is it money or is it the influence that a presidential endorsement from Donald Trump can provide? It's an interesting mix.
Is it possible that Griffin's millions might have backfired? Were voters turned off by the fact that Griffin was basically handpicking Irvin by funneling all this money into his campaign? Elisa?
It's certainly possible. I mean, there are so many factors at play. It's really hard to say which one is predominating here, and maybe we'll know a little more after the election. So certainly it's possible that people looked at Griffin's relationship with Irvin and said they don't want somebody who may be beholden to a billionaire like Griffin. They want somebody who's his own man or who's responsible to a broader range of donors. But it's also possible that, again, he just wasn't the right candidate, or that there was more money and support on the other side.
Jay, Common Cause has been working on campaign finance reform for decades. You know, after all of that work, is it at all disheartening to see a race like this being reduced to what we're calling the Battle of the Billionaires?
You know, it is, Common Cause is a national organization, so I have counterparts in states across the country. When I try to explain to them, not just about what the money looks like at the top of the ticket in the race for the governor's mansion, but uncontested races in for the House and Senate, where there are millions, which will prevent incumbents from facing a real challenge. It's really difficult to get into these races. It's incredibly disheartening, and honestly, the folks that suffer most are ordinary people who don't know a billionaire and can't run for office if they feel a call to public service, or there is always that concern about, well, if they're getting money from an outside source, is my elected official going to care about my needs, or are they going to answer the phone when the guy who cut them the big check calls?
Elisa, what are your main concerns about the impact that money is having on the elections and whether or not it's eroding public trust in our politics?
I would echo Jay. I mean, this is just a terrible system for a democracy. It's not healthy at all. The role of billionaires here drowns out other voices. It discourages people who might not have access to those really, really deep pockets from running for office. It makes ordinary people feel like they don't have a voice in the process. And it makes people feel like their politicians are bought and paid for, or are so rich that they don't share their interests or know anything about their daily struggles. So that's just not a good system in any way.
Jay, what steps can we take to minimize the role of big money in elections?
Well, we've got our hands tied a little bit because we've got some really bad case law coming out of the Supreme Court, which is allowing a lot of this, allowing the influence of money just to continue to grow. So we're not going to get sort of a savior coming down from the feds, but there's things we can do at the local level. There are policies that we've seen in terms of publicly financed elections in places like New York and Seattle and LA and Baltimore and DC. The list is growing. And so, there's really an opportunity to change the law here at the state level or even at the municipal level to make it easier for just somebody who wants to support a candidate of their choice but can't cut that big check. At least their voice could get amplified just a little bit.
Elisa, one thing you mentioned was that, Pritzker and the Democratic Governors Association, they've been spending money on ads that criticized Richard Irvin. And that's something that we've seen nationwide. Democrats helping those far right candidates in an attempt to face them in the general election. About 30 seconds left. What are your concerns about how that impacts the political process?
Well, what does that do to people watching these commercials? How are they supposed to know who's trying to influence their vote? It creates this kind of hall of mirrors effect where you really don't know what's going on. Who's telling you what? Who can I trust? Whose voice am I supposed to listen to? It's not a good development, and I'm afraid that we'll probably just see more of it. And I did want to add, there's one more thing about Illinois politics that ups the ante when it comes to campaign money, which is that we have a loophole that enables candidates to eliminate contribution caps on their races. And that's one of the reasons that we see these huge dollar amounts in races in Illinois that you don't necessarily see in other states.
Hall of mirrors. It's unfortunate for voters when they're trying to figure out how to cast their ballots. We'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Elisa Kaplan and Jay Young for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Up next, how a local organization is helping students with autism thrive outside the classroom. Stay with us.
Much of the story of Latinos in America is that of entrepreneurship. About 5 million Latino-owned businesses currently exist in the U.S.
Predominantly Latino communities often bear the environmental burden of heavy industry. Residents of those communities say they have a hard time making their concerns heard.
A Chicago-based photographer has a personal understanding of immigration, and he has spent years documenting small businesses.
The forces of gentrification can make people being priced out of their neighborhoods feel powerless. But the founders of Lolita's Bodega say residents have more power than they think.
There's much more ahead on the program, including more from the Board of Elections. But first, growing up with autism can be challenging, but with the right support, young people can live healthy, fulfilling lives. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez headed to the West Side to hear from an organization empowering young adults on the autism spectrum to learn life skills, all as it celebrates a significant milestone.
When it comes to farming, 22-year-old Alejandro Sanchez can tell you what it takes to grow vegetables.
Teamwork.
Teamwork.
Like, people can watch you back and help you each other.
Sanchez has been involved with the Growing Solutions Farm for the last 3 years.
People grow a vegetable in here and donate people who need some vegetable at home.
The 1.2-acre produce farm is a hands-on program teaching young adults like Sanchez the basics of farming with the goal of enhancing their social and vocational skills as they continue to grow into adults.
You say Urban Autism Solutions helps you? What did they tell you?
Like, never give up, be yourself.
The farm is a part of Urban Autism Solutions, also called UAS. It's an organization Julie and Michael Tracy were driven to start when they struggled to find adult services for their autistic son, John.
The suffering that our family went through when we looked for services and a path forward for him. And so we knew that we were going to have to not only support John, but to create a community around him of like-minded people, a compassionate community where he could work, where he could thrive, where he could grow.
The organization recently celebrated its 10-year anniversary and gave past participants like Elvis Sanchez a chance to showcase what they've learned.
I have a great time doing this since I never planned it before, so this is my first time planning like a plant. I don't know how to plant anything like that, so I just like watch it and learn how to do it.
Elvis started the Growing Solutions Farm program last summer and has since learned skills to prepare for job opportunities.
We learn about interviews, how to prepare an interview job, like dress well.
UAS also partners with different schools on the west side, offering a variety of services to support young adults from ages 16 to 22.
We really offer the skills that we don't think that the schools have enough time to do in terms of social work services and social thinking and social communication. That's a big part of what we do so that our students can be successful once they reach their first jobs.
The founders say they've helped young adults find jobs and motivate them to continue to pursue goals.
I want to be a FBI, then I changed my career, then I heard people who need a mental health counselor. Plus, I had a mental health counselor myself and a mentor who helped me a lot. They inspire me.
Elvis says the program has given him different alternatives to feel independent and navigate the challenges of his disability. He is currently working at Walmart.
I told my mom, like, why was I born like this? I should have been born normal. And I did cry much. So my mom gave me some advice like that it's fine that you have disability. You need to be bad about it. But I just realized something got changed, that I should be proud of who I am as a person.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And the Growing Farm Summer Program is set to start next month. You can head over to our website to learn more about the organization. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight. After a full day of Illinoisans casting their votes, we're live from outside the Board of Elections to hear from the county clerk. Cook County is currently at a high risk for COVID-19. We'll check in with Chicago's Public Health Commissioner, Dr. Allison Arwady. And summertime means no school, ice cream, and ticks. What everyone needs to know before heading out for their next outdoor adventure. And what exactly is the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District? Jeffrey Baer has the answer in tonight's Ask Jeffrey. But first, some more of today's top stories. The Missouri State Highway Patrol confirmed a fourth person has died as a result of yesterday's Amtrak derailment of a train headed to Chicago, including 3 passengers and the truck driver that was struck. The train derailed yesterday afternoon in Missouri when it struck a dump truck at a public crossing in Minden, about 100 miles northeast of Kansas City. Amtrak said in a statement it is continuing to work with local authorities to make sure that those who are injured get medical care and that everyone else receives services and transportation. Word on the street, Elmo got his COVID-19 vaccine.
I had a lot of questions about Elmo getting the COVID vaccine. Was it safe? Was it the right decision? I talked to our pediatrician so I could make the right choice. I learned that Elmo getting vaccinated is the best way to keep himself, our friends, neighbors, and everyone else healthy and enjoying the things they love.
Sesame Street, that is. The public service announcement follows the FDA's authorization of the shot for children under 5. In just a few minutes, we are one-on-one with Chicago's top doctor with the latest COVID data. But first, back to Amanda Vinicky, who is reporting tonight from outside the Board of Elections, where the county clerk, among others, is working to tally today's votes. Amanda.
Yes, Brandis, we are joined by the county clerk, Karen Yarborough, as well as the deputy clerk of elections, Ed Michalowski. So for starters, we did say that there were a handful of Cook County elections polling sites that had to stay open, continue to be open until 8 p.m. Why is that? Anything to do with a lack of election judges?
You know, it's less than 1%. But let me just say, it happens every election. We had some folks that didn't show up. The judges are a problem from time to time. When they don't show up, we have to do something, and there's something we're doing. We went to the court and we have them open until 8 o'clock. So we believe that democracy is really important, and so that's why we have them open.
Do you suspect at all that the election judges is an issue due to what we're watching in D.C., where just last week we had an elections worker, not from Illinois, testify about harassment?
Well, I haven't seen the harassment. What I've seen is the average age of our judge is around 70. And so we need to get younger judges. And we have a pilot program that we're rolling out now. And we're going to give kids college credit. And they'll go through a curriculum as soon as we get it certified. And they're going to be paid something like $700, you know, to be a judge.
To be an elections judge.
Absolutely. Maybe you want to sign up, huh?
Sure. Got that, boss? Now, how about turnout? In the city of Chicago, it was not quite edging to 20%. Do you know what it is for suburban Cook County, Ed?
Yeah, we're going to be right at 20% as well. We had about 184,000 people show up today and vote. 77,000 people early voted. And we're going to probably, at the end of the day, be about 50,000 mail ballots.
Where does that rank in terms of participation compared with previous primaries? Obviously, this is a different one. It's in June, usually in March, but also a lot of opportunities to cast your ballot. It didn't just have to be today.
So we set the record for a June primary, that's for sure, since it's the only June primary. But we're about 9% shorter than where we were 4 years ago when we had a hotly contested gubernatorial election. So I think, you know, democracy is important, like the clerk said, and people showed up today. 180,000 people showed up to vote today in suburban Cook County, and we're really happy about that.
And what can you tell us about that data? Who is showing up to vote?
We haven't dissected any of the data yet. We're waiting for the polls to close.
And is it mostly people that are casting their ballots in person, or are people really moving more now that you have an opportunity to sign up? Because there's some changes in Illinois law, right, Clerk, that make it easier to vote by mail forever. Tell me about that.
They can, and they were able to do it this time around. They could sign up, and they can get their ballot in the mail, and they can do that. So what I found today, though, was there was a mix of people who some people want to be there. They like the action on election day. But then there are others. I mean, let's face it, we've never had an election in June. And so the kids are out of school, people have gone on vacation. They better get their ballots in early rather than, you know. I ran into somebody yesterday at the grocery store who said to me, "Oh, Karen, I'm seeing all these signs and things
What's going
everywhere."
On? I didn't even realize what was going on.
I thought, is this for the election in November? I said, this is for the election tomorrow.
On Tuesday. And we have about 10 seconds left. Ed, can you tell me, when are we expecting to get results coming in? People want to know who won these races.
So we're going to have a ton of results popping in right at 8 o'clock when the polls close.
All right, so be watching. Thank you so much for joining us once again, Ed Michalowski and Clerk Karen Yarborough. With that, back to you in the studio.
Amanda, thank you. 8 o'clock, that's in a little over 20 minutes. Thank you. Cook County residents are once again at high risk of contracting COVID. This after the county had moved back down to medium risk for just about a week. Joining us to talk about what this means for area residents is Dr. Allison Arwady, Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health. Dr. Arwady, welcome back. Thank you for joining us again. So,
thank you, Brandon.
Cook County back at a high risk. You've said that the city, you expected the city to return to medium risk on Friday. What are the trends? What's the data that's telling you that?
Yeah, so really in Chicago and in Cook County broadly, we've been right on this borderline for the metrics that are set all over the country between medium and high. And what we're seeing is we're at 202 for the whole county, where it's the number of new cases per 100,000, and we want to get that under 200. And then we're seeing about 10.2 new admissions per 100,000 in a week, and we've got to get that under 10. So given that we are seeing a lot of COVID, and I want folks to know that, get up to date with your vaccines, get your boosters. Do please be putting that mask on indoors. But we're not seeing a major surge at this point, even while we're seeing more variants in the BA4, BA5 now being that predominant Omicron variant.
And it seemed like, just a few weeks ago, the area, fell from high to medium, albeit briefly. What has changed since then to put us back into this high-risk category?
Yeah, we actually saw a few more hospitalizations, not really in the city of Chicago, but the CDC uses the whole referral area. So even outside of Cook County, if there are more people getting hospitalized with COVID, then that will count against our numbers a little bit. So both of the main metrics that we follow are just over that threshold again, and we follow those national thresholds. But less than 4% of our hospital beds are taken up by COVID patients, and mostly this is people over 65, especially people who had not been up to date with their boosters. So now is the time, we all want to come back down as a city and as a region, just to make sure that people are up to date. If you got your first vaccine in 2021, you should have had 3 vaccines by now, meaning you should have had a booster. And if you're over 50 or you have underlying conditions, you should have had 4 by now. So they're widely available for all ages, and it's the most important thing, just to help keep those more severe outcomes down.
And you've also said this week, Dr. Arwady, that the positivity rate shouldn't necessarily be a cause of concern. And as you said, it's currently at 10.9%, or that's the number we're getting from your office. Why not? Why not the positivity rate?
Yes, so we don't use the positivity rate anymore when we're looking at risk metrics, because as I do at home, as many of you do, most of our testing at this point is taking place at home. So that formal positivity rate that gets reported is really people who are going to get a formal laboratory PCR test. They're much more likely to do that if they're symptomatic, or maybe they had a positive test at home and they're wanting to double check, which you don't need to do. But also, we were doing so much screening in Chicago public schools that with school out of session, the number of tests really dropped a lot. So I'm not concerned about that change that we've seen. I'm not hugely concerned overall with these variants, but there is a lot of COVID, and just asking people while we're at this increased risk, just to take some additional precautions, move outside, put that mask on, and please get up to date with the vaccines.
And of course, you mentioned these new Omicron subvariants, BA4 and BA5, and how they become the dominant strain in the U.S., according to the CDC. What do we know about those 2 subvariants?
Yeah, so what we've been seeing with Omicron is really every few weeks, because we have so much ongoing transmission of COVID. Every time there's a spread of COVID, it's the opportunity for the virus to mutate again. And so this BA4, BA5 is the most contagious version yet. But the good news is it doesn't seem to be putting people more in the hospital. It's just the reason it outcompetes the variants that came before is that it is more contagious. And we're starting to see some people, even if they were infected with Omicron, the original Omicron back in January, we are starting to see some people even get infected again now with BA4-5. So getting up to date with vaccines is the most important thing. But we're continuing to monitor it. I'm not concerned about a huge surge coming from BA4-5, but certainly that is driving some of this slight increase that we are seeing in the region.
Do we know yet much about the effectiveness of current vaccines against these 2 subvariants?
So thankfully, the vaccines remain incredibly effective at preventing severe outcomes, especially hospitalization and death. And the boosters matter even more than they did in the past. With each of these new subvariants of Omicron, that booster data makes even more of a difference in terms of keeping people out of the hospital. We are seeing many more breakthrough infections because this is so contagious. And it's one of the reasons just today the FDA advisory group did formally suggest that that we have an updated booster that's made more specifically to help fight against the Omicron, the ways that the virus has changed. So I anticipate probably later this fall, probably October, possibly November, we may have sort of an updated COVID vaccine that will help not just with severe outcomes, but with some of these infections. But in the meantime, you know, we're seeing most people, if they're up to date with vaccines, not get very seriously ill. And you know, I'm still seeing a lot of people wearing their mask on the L, and I want to thank folks for doing that.
And to pivot, we've got about 30 seconds left, Dr. Arwady. The city recently cited pollution concerns as the reason for rejecting $500 million in asphalt builds from a McKinley Park asphalt maker. In about 30 seconds, what in particular was concerning to the city about that?
Sure. So obviously the Chicago Department of Transportation needs asphalt to be able to repair our roads and make sure we can get around. What we were concerned about was that the lowest bidder, when the Department of Transportation had put out a bid, would have put all of the asphalt production in one location, really without enough protections for things like air pollution, noise pollution, truck traffic, et cetera. And so the city is going to rebid that. We definitely will be procuring asphalt, but just with some more protections in place. That'll be later in the fall.
Okay, and something that community members in that area had been voicing their concerns about as well. Dr. Allison Arwady, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, summertime means more time spent outdoors, which also means ticks. Some things to know about those little bloodsuckers, but first, a look at the weather.
It's that time of year, you head out on summer vacation or spend some time outdoors and you find an unwelcome guest has hitched along for the ride. We're talking about ticks, but some wildlife professionals are saying everything you've heard about ticks is probably a myth. Here to help separate fact from fiction is WTTW news reporter Patty Wetley. All right, Patty, what are the myths here about ticks that we hold as truth?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to admit that I've fallen victim to some of these myself, and a lot have to do with how you remove ticks. One of the myths being that if you don't get all of its mouthpieces out, that it's going to somehow worm its way in under your skin and grow another head or lay eggs, none of which is true. According to the experts, if you leave a tiny, tiny bit, it's not going to regenerate and it's not going to cause any more harm than your basic splinter. Some other ones are that you should try and burn them off or put perfume on them. No. Just, get a pair of tweezers and give it a good single tug off as close to the skin as possible.
Sounds like good fodder for a sci-fi movie there, though, growing those heads, burrowing under your skin. All right, so what are the realities of ticks? What do we know about them?
I mean, the reality is that they're not just in the deep woods. They are also found in, Chicago city parks. They like tall grass just as much as the woods. So you need to be prepared if you're heading outdoors. And that means something as simple as using a spray that has DEET or, even better, put on long sleeves, put on some long pants, tuck them into your socks, don't give them anything to latch onto. And unlike mosquitoes, they aren't going to necessarily be able to jab through your clothes. So the experts say, don't be scared, be prepared. So take that as a guide. You can still head outside and enjoy the outdoors, but, just know where ticks might be and look for them when you get home.
All right, ways to refrain from being ticked off. Patty Wetley, thank you very much.
Good job.
No, I don't deserve credit at all. And you can read Patty's full story on our website, where you can learn more about the research on ticks in the local area. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And we're back with an explanation about a mysterious governmental body right after this.
Ask Jeffrey is brought to you in part by BMO Harris Bank.
Okay. Can you get this? I don't have my wallet. Oh, really? It's funny how that always happens. Yeah, it's fine.
With BMO Harris, you don't need your wallet. You can get money from any BMO ATM using your phone.
Uh-oh, looks like someone can buy their own tacos. Okay.
You could also pay him back with Zelle.
So many ways for you to pay. You know what? I'm not hungry. I'll just have some of yours.
Order for BMO.
Ooh, tacos, banking. Some things are made to be mobile.
That feeling you get when your phone is your wallet. That's the BMO effect.
Tonight we go to our Ask Jeffrey archives for a relevant and timely question. Among the offices on the ballot today are commissioners of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. That body may be a mystery to many of you, but judging from the response on our voter guide, where tens of thousands of you have searched for information about those candidates, that's more than any other office. Interest seems very strong. So here from the Jeffrey archives, Jeffrey Bayer on the MWRD plant in Skokie. We begin with a question from Patrick Moorhead from Deerfield. There is a beautiful building that appears to be from a different era on the northwest corner of Howard and McCormick Boulevard. The structure is maybe used for water filtration or reclamation. The building looks like it might have had a different owner at one time, or perhaps was intentioned for a purpose other than it currently serves. What is the history of this elegant building from yesteryear?
Well, yes, this building is in fact part of a massive wastewater treatment facility called the O'Brien Water Reclamation Plant in Skokie, which is near the borders of Lincolnwood and Chicago. It's operated by the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. That's a mouthful, shortened as MWRD. It's definitely quite ornate for a place that treats sewage. It comes from a time when utilitarian buildings were given some design flair. I, in fact, used to pass this building every day driving my young daughters to day camp, and one of them told me that some of the kids call it the Stinky Castle, or even better, the Poo Palace. The facility takes in and cleans around 230 million gallons a day of wastewater from our bathrooms, kitchen sinks, and storm sewers, but it does not actually produce drinking water. It just cleans wastewater enough so that it can be released safely into the river system. The ornamented building that our viewer asked about is known as the Pump and Blower Building. And as you can see here, it's full of sewage pumps that lift wastewater into the plant. The blowers in this building provide compressed air for a biological treatment process that helps remove pollutants from the water, and we'll talk about that later. And no, the building has never been anything but a wastewater treatment facility, although when it opened in 1928, the MWRD did have a different name. It was called the Chicago Sanitary District.
I've done stories on this whole process over the years, but remind us how that water gets cleaned exactly.
Well, it's actually really fascinating. Water enters the facility, wastewater. First, it's filtered to remove debris, and then it flows through a series of tanks that remove oils and fats and separate out heavy organic matter. That's a euphemism. Air is then pumped through the water in aeration tanks to encourage the growth of certain good microbes that essentially eat bacteria and other matter. And then the final step in the process, O'Brien claims to have the largest ultraviolet disinfection facility in the U.S. And this is a new thing in the process. Powerful ultraviolet lights neutralize bacteria in the water before releasing it into the adjacent North Shore Channel. And the MWRD also has a process here and also at their plant in Stickney that reclaims nutrients from the water like phosphorus and nitrogen that can cause toxic algae blooms. And it converts those materials into this stuff. Let me see if you can, I don't know if you can see that. This fertilizer that actually brings in some revenue to the MWRD.
And Jeffrey, you know, you mentioned that this building never had any other use. It's always been the Poo Palace, for lack of a better term. So it's quite attractive for having such a kind of a gritty function to it.
Well, right. As I mentioned, it comes from a time when even the most utilitarian buildings had panache. And so that sort of inspired us to share just a few others quickly with you, some other examples from around Chicago, like this ComEd substation on Dearborn Street downtown across from the Picasso and Daly Plaza. I love this Art Deco style muscle man with his fists full of lightning proudly represents the electrical machinery hidden inside. Another Art Deco standout, literally, is the Union Station Powerhouse. People on my boat tour sometimes ask if this is from the cover of a Pink Floyd album.
Oh, yeah.
That was a power station in London. This old coal-fired power plant once provided energy to Union Station and the surrounding infrastructure, but since it closed in 2011, it's actually fallen under the threat of demolition from its current owner, which is Amtrak. Others are more tucked away in city neighborhoods, like this neoclassical style Thomas Jefferson Pumping Station in Lincoln Square. It's operated by the city's Department of Water Management, which, unlike the O'Brien plant we saw earlier, is actually part of the system that provides drinking water to homes on the north side. There are prairie-style substations around Chicago, but take heart, making utility buildings beautiful is not just a thing of the past. On the University of Chicago campus, for just one example, actually two examples, are these two contemporary, sleekly designed mechanical buildings by Chicago architect Helmut Jahn. This is the translucent South Campus chiller plant, which, contrary to most utility buildings, leaves the machinery exposed for the outside world to see. And there's a similar idea on display in the West Campus combined utility plant at University of Chicago, with its color-coded steam and chilling equipment, again, visible through these glass windows.
Form and function in these buildings. All right, thank you, Jeffrey.
My pleasure.
And don't forget that you can visit our website for more details about the O'Brien Water Reclamation Plant and Chicago's utility buildings. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Jeffrey Bayer. That's at WTTW.com/AskJeffrey. Back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.
Wow. On Finding Your Roots, filmmaker Michael Moore.
My soul has been touched by this.
Actors Chloe Sevigny.
I think my father was very